Welcome, everyone. I'm Jennifer Morris, CEO of the Nature Conservancy. So we spent the day talking about the determining decade, this critical moment for making the tough decisions that will determine the future of our planet and the legacy we will leave for future generations. And now we are ending our day with a true conservation icon. For nearly 60 years, Dr. Jane Goodall's incredible work has shown us that the urgent need to protect chimpanzees from extinction. She has also redefined species conservation to include the needs of local people and the environment. Jane, it is such a pleasure to have you with us today for the Nature Conservancy's Earth Day Summit. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And by the way, I haven't just been working to save chimpanzees. It's everything. It's biodiversity, isn't it?
It really is. No, absolutely. And I think that's some of what we're going to talk about today. You've had an incredible career, Jane. I mean, actually, two careers. First as a field scientist, and second as a conservation leader and global advocate for wildlife and for people, of course, and the environment working together. And I've heard you say that you went to Gombe with a dream and you came out with a mission. You've seen so much change over your career and your life. And you've often remarked on some of the changes that we're experiencing now, like the climate crisis. And really, we just don't have much time to turn things around. So, Jane, I'd love to hear you share with the audience, what do you see as our biggest challenges? And what gives you hope that we can change the world for better?
Well, first of all, obviously, the climate crisis is a real crisis. And along with that comes loss of biodiversity. And, it just reminds us, or we need to be reminded that we're part of and not separate from the natural world. And we actually depend on it for clean air and water, for food, clothing, and everything else. And if we continue to destroy it at the rate that we are, then the future for the children born today is pretty grim. And I don't know that we have that long to turn things around. However, I do have hope, because I think if you don't have hope, then you may as well give up. I mean, if you do stuff and you don't actually believe it's going to help, why bother? You might as well eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. So I just have hope in the resilience of nature. Give it a chance, we can restore places we've destroyed, rescue animals on the brink of extinction. I have great hope in the energy and commitment of young people once they know the problems and we listen to them and they're empowered to take action. And also the incredible human intellect. And we got ourselves into this mess. Now we better get more of those brilliant brains together to get ourselves out.
Absolutely. As I reflect on what we've all been through as a global society in the last year and thinking about COVID, do you feel, Jane, that as we go through this crisis, that on the other side of it, and we still have a long way to go, but on the other side of it, that we'll look at things differently, that we'll actually appreciate humans' relationship with nature differently?
Well, I think, unfortunately, as you know full well, we brought this epidemic on ourselves, this pandemic, because of our absolute disrespect of nature and animals, creating conditions that make it relatively easy for a pathogen such as the COVID-19 virus to spill over from an animal to a person. We hunt them, eat them, invade their environments with roads and dams and mines. We capture them, traffic them or their body parts around the world. We sell them in wildlife markets for food, for skin, for medicine, for pets. We crowd them into our factory farms in horrendous conditions. And in all these situations, it's possible for a new zoonotic disease to arise. And they say 75% of zoonotic diseases, of new diseases in humans, are zoonotic. And, it's very clear that we definitely need a new relationship with the natural world and with animals. And I think as a result of the pandemic, more and more people are realizing this. But we need more. We need some of the leaders who still operate on this crazy notion that we can have unlimited economic development, short-term gain over long-term conservation for the future. And this on a planet with finite natural resources, which in some places are disappearing faster than nature can replenish them, and growing populations of humans and their livestock. And, it's clear from what's going on that we must have a new relationship with nature and animals, and we must develop a more sustainable economy. But have we got the political will around the world to do it? That's the big problem. We've got to somehow get the political leaders of the major countries to toe the line and to join us in this effort that we've got to make if we care about the future.
I wanted to ask you about, this concept that I'm often speaking about related to radical partnerships and the critical role that working together has to play if we're actually going to make a change in the very limited time that we have left to turn things around. Jane, the Nature Conservancy and your wonderful institute, the Jane Goodall Institute, have been partners for nearly 20 years in Africa. We know that partnerships are critical, but they're hard. Actually, they can often be very challenging. And I'd love to hear a little bit, Jane, about your experience and what you've learned about partnership, and if there's a secret sauce, if you will, on creating good partnerships for conservation and human development.
None of us can do it alone. I mean, it's quite ridiculous. The problems are huge. They're enormous around the globe. And we actually need every single organization that cares about the future of the planet to get together and to work out ways that we can share these small pools of money available and find ways of lobbying those billionaires who have so much money to help us so that we don't have to fight and squabble over funding.
Absolutely. So well said. And that's, I think, I'm noticing things change a bit, Jane, in this respect. I think part of it is the urgency of our cause, and part of it is exactly what you said, is people are recognizing that this endless fighting over small resources is really insufficient for the scale of the problems that we face. So coming together, working together, getting out of our own organizational egos and own, institutional barriers, and really working together. And I think partnerships like the one that the Nature Conservancy has with your wonderful institute, the Jane Goodall Institute, is one of many examples of how we have to do that together. And I think some of the answer is in starting and collaborating things together. That can often, I think, lead to the change that we need to see. One of the powerful, different types of collaborations that we're working on is around science and technology. And, so much has changed again since you first went to Gombe in 1960. There's so much happening in tech. Do you see any examples that particularly inspire you related to science and technology that can help the conservation movement, especially when we work in collaboration and partnership?
Oh, yes, I really do. When I first went to Gombe, I didn't even have a typewriter. I couldn't afford it. And there were no computers. I mean, I grew up in a world where there was no television. So I got to Gombe with a pencil and some notebooks. That was it. And of course, things have changed. And the speed of technological advances recently has been quite astounding. So some of the technology that's really helped us, camera traps, absolutely amazing, so that you can find out what's going on when you're not there. And drones used correctly can help to map out an area in a short time that would take days to do on foot, and actually probably bring back even more information. But I think for us, the most important technology that's been introduced into our JGI work by Dr. Lillian Pintea, who's our director of conservation research, is GIS, GPS, and satellite imagery. And not only does this help to map chimp range, but, you know, we feel that it's tremendously important to work with local communities. You've said that already. And so back in 1994, we began our method of community-based conservation, Tukari, Take Care Tukari. And it was a group of local Tanzanians going into the village, not arrogant white people. Oh, you've made a mess of things. You've cut down all your trees. How do you think you're going to decide? Which was typical back then. But people that they knew and trusted going in and asking, what can we do to help? And so that's where we started, creating a really holistic program, which included microcredit scholarships to keep girls in school, water management programs, restoring fertility to overused farmland. I mean, these people, so poor they couldn't afford to grow food elsewhere, so they were cutting down trees, even on the really steep slopes, to try and grow more food to feed their families or make money from charcoal, which led to terrible soil erosion, silting up the little streams. It was a nightmare back then. So involving the local people from the start. And when Lillian came in with this technology, when we're particularly grateful to Jack Dangermond and Esri, and this has enabled us to train local village forest monitors, starting off as volunteers, going to workshops, learning how to use smartphones or iTablets or whatever. I'm not technological myself at all. They go out into the forest. They chose together what they would record: a fallen tree, an illegally cut tree, and an animal trap, sighting a chimpanzee nest or a pangolin. And that's uploaded into a platform in the clouds, very transparent for everyone. And the program was so successful, what started with 12 villages around Gombe is now in 104 villages throughout the chimp range. And if you fly over the area today, you won't see the bare hills that I saw when I flew over in 1990, because the forest has come back partly from restoration efforts, tree planting, partly because these magical seeds that are left in the ground, as long as it hasn't been too long since the trees were cut, they've regenerated, and sometimes the roots that were left in the ground. And so a combination of hard work on our part and resilience of nature on the other has brought the forests back. And that program's now in 6 other African countries.
That's incredible. What you have been able to accomplish, and that communities, you know, having that buy-in is so key. And really, I think some of your work, Jane, on the ground really decided and drove so much conservation throughout Africa and around the world, really on this community-centered approach. It really has been incredible. And how technology, and I've seen for myself working with rangers and community organizers around conservation areas, and what they can do with a tablet and connected to GPS using drones. It's just really phenomenal. And we need that. We need to make sure that we as conservationists are using all the tools in our toolbox, and we're addressing the barriers to their adoption and speed on the ground, because without that, we're always going to be behind other sectors and always be behind interests that will destroy the forest and those communities over the long term as well. So I think it's just phenomenal what you have been able to achieve and how technology is accelerating it. I'd love to ask you maybe a little bit more of a personal question, Jane. You know, the world has changed so much for women since you first traveled to Africa in 1960. Women, of course, still face many, many barriers, and the environmental sector, as we know, has been traditionally led by men. For example, after 70 years of the Nature Conservancy being in existence, I'm the first permanent female CEO. So many women are listening to this today and are looking up to you and your incredible career. What advice would you give young women entering the field of conservation today?
Well, first of all, it's very different for young women going into conservation today than it was for me. Because people say, how did you get into a male-dominated world? But when I first went to Africa, it was actually 57, my first trip, when I met Louis Leakey. Wow. There was nobody out in the field, really. There was George Scheller with gorillas, and there were two Americans in South Africa studying chacma baboons, and really not many other people. So it was a new world. And I was lucky in that Louis Leakey felt women might be better observers, more patient. And I was lucky in that he wanted someone who hadn't been to college, which I hadn't. I just went with my dream of living with wild animals and learning about them. He wanted a mind that wasn't cluttered up with the reductionist thinking of the ethologists at that time. So I was really lucky. And what I would say and do say to young women is, one, if you want to go into conservation today, you probably need a degree depending on what you want to do. But some young people really just want to go and work in sanctuaries, and that's amazingly helpful. We need people out in the sanctuaries. We've got two, and I know it. Secondly, they've got to, if they want to do some kind of research in the field, they will have to get a degree, and they must try and make sure that they really are passionate about it, because it's not easy, and funding for it isn't that easy to acquire. So I usually advise them to, in a gap year, to go and volunteer in a program, whatever they can find around the world, and make sure that they can stand conditions when it's, not always very pleasant out in the field, too hot or too cold, too wet, too dry. And of course, today we have the problem of, in some areas, luckily not ours, but, they can face poachers and violence. So many rangers, for example, and including women rangers, lose their lives in the course of duty. It's so many of them.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's it's great advice. So it's not for the faint of heart, for sure. Another segment of populations around the world, Jane, that you and the Jane Goodall Institute have really focused on, that's just been so inspiring, is around youth. And you've really been able to galvanize youth into not just wonderful projects on the ground in place, but really a movement. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about why activating youth, I mean, beyond the obvious in the next generation, but why do you feel that activating youth has been so critical for your own personal goals?
Well, I began our program, which is called Roots and Shoots, by the way, back in 1991, because I was meeting so many young people all around the world as I was lecturing who'd lost hope, and they were depressed or angry or just apathetic. And I asked them, why do you feel this way? Basically, well, you've compromised our future and there's nothing we can do about it. And you hear so often, we haven't borrowed this planet from our ancestors. We haven't inherited this planet from our ancestors. We borrowed it from our children, but we have stolen, and we're still stealing. And so, but when they said there was nothing they could do about it, I thought, no, that's not true. And the best antidote for depression is actually knuckling down and choosing projects and taking action and seeing that you've made a difference. So our groups are different from any other youth movement that I've encountered, in that each group is required to choose 3 projects between them, one to help people, one to help animals, one to help the environment, because I learned in the rainforest that everything is interconnected. Every little species has a role to play. And so what began with 12 high school students in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam, is now in 68 countries, with members from preschool, university, everything in between, even some adult groups now. And so the main message is every single one of us makes some impact every single day. And we need to choose ethically about the impact we make. What do we buy? Where does it come from? Did it harm the environment? Was it cruel to animals, like the factory farms? Is it cheap because of child slave labor or inequitable wages? Almost certainly that's why it's cheap. And that's why we have to alleviate poverty, because if you're really poor, you can't make those ethical choices. You don't have that luxury. You have to cut down the last trees to grow food or make charcoal. You have to fish the last fish to feed your family. And you have to buy the cheapest junk food just in order to survive.
Yes.
So anyway, roots and shoots, it's the name comes from, think of your favorite tree and how it began as a little seed. And when it began to grow, you could pick it up and you'd see little roots and a tiny shoot. How small, how insignificant. But the magic, the life force in that seed is so powerful that those little roots to get the water can work through rocks and eventually push them aside. And that little shoot to reach the sunlight can work through cracks in a brick wall and eventually break it open. So we see all the problems, environmental and social, that we've inflicted on the planet as the rocks and the walls. So Roots and Shoots is all about hope. Hundreds and thousands, billions and millions of young people can break through and make this a better world.
That was absolutely beautiful, Jane. And I've followed the work of Roots and Shoots over the years, and it's so inspirational, I think, for all organizations, as we talked about before, in terms of partnership and really thinking about these examples from your organization to how that needs to spread across the world, and have more and more people to embody that cause for change that you so eloquently just set out. So we're celebrating Earth Day with this podcast, or this cast here, and I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about, given the urgency of the climate crisis and all of the things that you've seen around the world, what keeps you going? What do you feel is the reason that we should all embrace hope as we listen to this message and think about this most important of days of Earth Day?
Well, first of all, Earth Day should be every day. Only when Earth Day is every day will we really succeed in our mission. But, why is hope important? Because I've said, if you don't have hope, why bother? You fall into apathy. Mm-hmm. And what keeps me going, I would say number one is this energy and commitment of young people. Mm-hmm. And secondly, I've seen changes in some of the big corporations, whether it's from consumer pressure or whether it's from a change of heart of a CEO. And by the way, lots of our Roots and Shoots members are changing their parents. So it's working in this amazing grassroots way. And so I've seen changes being planned in the way big corporations do what they do. But it's also thinking about other ways that we as individuals can help. And the growing movement of vegetarianism and veganism in the last few years is really staggering. I'm completely amazed. When I became a vegetarian in late 1960s, it was quite hard. And now there's vegan menus all over the place. So people are changing, people are understanding. And it just means more of us need to get together and help people understand that what they do does make a difference. So we must never be told or believe that something that we feel passionate about is impossible. Maybe we've planned it the wrong way and we should listen and take advice, but never be. I mean, when I wanted to go to Africa when I was 10 to live with wild animals and write books about them, everybody laughed at me except my wonderful mother, who told me, if you really want to do this, then you're going to have to work awfully hard, take advantage of every opportunity. But if you don't give up, you may find a way. That's what I tell young people today.
That's fantastic. I think that's a wonderful place for us to leave it, Jane. Thank you so much for being with us today and for your lifetime of conservation work that will continue. And we here at the Nature Conservancy are so inspired by you and your optimism and your devotion and your incredible work and really your pioneering efforts around the world in your entire career, and just really appreciate you joining us today. And I want to thank everybody else out there for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll join the Nature Conservancy in our mission to stop the climate crisis and preserve and restore the lands and waters on which all life depends. Happy Earth Day, and thank you so much, Jane.
And join the Jane Goodall Institute also. Roots
Absolutely. Please join Jane Goodall and join your local organizations as well. It's going to take all of us. So thank you so much to the Jane Goodall Institute and to Jane herself for being with us today.
Thank you. And goodbye, everyone.
What an insightful and inspirational program today. Hi, I'm David Gadsden, Director of Conservation Solutions at Esri, and I have the honor of closing today's session following that extraordinary conversation between Jennifer Morris and the legendary Dr. Jane Goodall. I've been reflecting on today's program, and it is exceedingly clear how incredibly important the insights and wisdoms shared today are. We find ourselves at a crucial period of history, whereby the pressure exerted by the human footprint onto the natural world has reached a threshold by which every natural system on Earth is being degraded, threatening both our existence and the vast diversity of life on Earth. At the same time, as was clearly evident today, courageous leaders from across multiple sectors are rising to the occasion to find innovative solutions for conserving our world. Committed organizations are working together more than ever before to pivot towards a more sustainable future, where we allow nature to recover to its previous abundance. And in doing so, we have the opportunity to strengthen the resilience of our natural world as humanity learns to live within its means. Our actions today and in this determining decade are extremely important, and yet any individual, any organization, cannot simply resolve the wicked problems before us, as Jane just made so clear. What is so inspiring about today's session is the critical importance of aligning and working towards comprehensive solutions. As the global leader in geospatial technology, we at Esri have had the honor of building genuine partnerships with both the Nature Conservancy and the Jane Goodall Institute. Our alignment is natural and fitting as we share common values. We work well together because we care about the same things: the well-being and progress of the human world and the sanctity of the natural world. Nature is the solution, and through partnerships like ours, which bring our respective strengths and assets to these challenges, much opportunity lies ahead. But to address these massive challenges, we need to adapt and evolve. We must move beyond insular and competitive behavior in the field of conservation, particularly in conservation technology, in order to truly accomplish integrated and open conservation science. We applaud TNC and JGI for the broad partnerships they nurture. It is only through expanding such partnerships that we can take solutions that we know to work to scale, leveraging our collective knowledge and our shared capabilities. Finally, it's essential that we invest in supporting underrepresented communities to be full partners in conservation, as Dolores Huerta explained so eloquently earlier today. In particular, we need to continue to empower and engage Indigenous communities, not only to participate, but to lead the adoption of new strategies to truly let nature be the solution, guided by local Indigenous knowledge of natural systems often learned over thousands and thousands of years. It's in that frame that I'm honored to conclude today's program, which has been so timely for our shared experience ahead. Thank you.